Hello everyone, welcome to Tech2.com. In this video, we will learn some important aspects about transaction failure, recovery and the log which system maintains. Okay, so when a transaction is submitted to a database system, let's say this is a transaction, and when I am saying transaction, of course it will have multiple operations. Okay, so let's say these are operations, fine. And now when it is submitted to a database system, now this is responsibility of this database management system to execute all of this operation. Okay, mind well, I am saying all. Okay, this is important, right? Because in any case this database management system should not allow half of the operations to execute and half of the operations to bypass. Okay, as we know from the concept of atomicity that a transaction has to execute its all operation or none of the operations. Okay, so basically the transaction will execute or it will not be executed, right? There will not be a case when half of the operations of a transaction is executed, right? So this is the basic principle. Now there may be a case when this transaction is failed. Okay, so let's say when the transaction was running its operation and in between some system failure occurs. In that case, transaction will be half of the operations of the transaction will be executed and remaining half are still to be executed, right? So in this case, this is a case of failure, and in this case we should have a mechanism to do recovery, right? Fine. And this is the responsibility of recovery manager, of course, we know, right? Now this recovery is generally done with the help of log files. Okay, so if you have MySQL installed, you can go to the MySQL directory, okay, and there you can find out log files which is generated for each transaction. So first let's understand what are the reasons of transaction failure. So generally transaction failures have the following reasons. The first one is that system failure or system crash. System failure means during the transaction at certain point the system or the computer fails due to n number of reasons. Maybe it is a power failure, maybe it is a network failure, or maybe it is some internal errors. Okay, so due to n number of reasons a system fails, okay, and that causes transaction failure too, right? Now next can be transaction or system error. So these failures are basically like, let's say during the transaction the system executes an expression where expression is there which is like something divided by 0. Okay, so this will cause a transaction failure. Similarly, let's say I am storing a value in integer and it has of course a range to store, right? So when this range overflows, like the value is larger than the range provided, okay, this will also cause a failure. So similar problems can occur. Similarly, a programmer has done the programming and that program is not well tested, and during the execution it causes a logical programming failure. Okay, so these are the kind of errors which comes under this transaction or system error, and this transaction and system error can cause transaction failure. Third reason can be concurrency control enforcement. So as we have already understood what is concurrency control, okay, so basically multiple transactions are happening over a database, okay, and then we need to control the concurrency or concurrent execution for n number of reasons which we have already studied. Okay, so this concurrency control may sometime cause the failure of a transaction. Okay, so let's imagine a situation when this transaction is in between, right? Multiple transactions are executing, okay, and there is a situation where let's say T1, T2, T3, okay, multiple transactions are executing together, and now these transactions has also caused the situation of deadlock. Okay, now if there is a deadlock, one of the transaction has to be aborted. Okay, so system forcefully aborts the transaction. Okay, this of course causes the transaction failure for the aborted transaction. Let's say I abort this transaction to break the deadlock. Okay, then this transaction is failed, right? The next is local error or exceptions during the transaction. Okay, so let's say when transaction begins, everything was perfectly fine. Now in between, when operations of the transaction were executing, okay, the system realizes an exception. In that case, the transaction will be aborted, and the reason will be called local error or exceptions. So this we can understand well with, let's say, in my account I have 1000 rupees balance. Okay, now I initiated transaction for 800 rupees. Okay, so now transaction is initiated. Now I am going to withdraw 800 rupees. So transaction is initiated by checking whether I have enough balance. Okay, so initially it will check whether I have enough balance. So it is yes, it is greater than 800, so I can withdraw. While executing, I did another transaction with some other means of transaction, let's say through ATM, and now my balance is 800, let's say 200. Okay, now when the balance is 200 and I am trying to withdraw an amount of 800, of course this will throw an error, right? So this kind of error comes under local error or exception. Okay, so these four are the main reasons, and these are well recoverable. Okay, we can recover these errors, but we also have something called hard disk failure. Quite often we realize that when we turn on our system, our computer, the computer boots properly, but I mean when it starts booting, of course it is not able to load the operating system to RAM. Okay, and an error comes in the blue screen. If you are using a Windows system, the error will come showing that disk error, right? So this disk error means that the system is not able to read the disk properly. Okay, so this disk has failed and it is not working properly. Of course in our case also it ends up with buying a new disk, okay, replacing our hard disk. So similar failure can occur with the database management system where, I mean with the system where this database management system is running, right? So everything is ultimately written to the disk, and if the disk is gone, everything is gone, right? So this is basically a major problem. Okay, so this is a major problem. Now in this case, if you don't have any backup, it is very hard to recover, right? So in that case, maybe this hard disk itself has to be recovered, and then you can recover the data out of it. So that's why I'm saying it is very hard to recover. Okay, in other cases the system is well capable of fetching the data from this log file and doing a recovery. Similarly, we can also have let me write down. Similarly, we can also have physical problem and catastrophes. So let's say the whole system is destroyed due to some external issue like earthquake or flood. So these are also issues which can cause transaction failure, of course, right? And in this case also it is very hard to do recovery, right? So this is again very hard. Okay, this one also very hard to recover. So these two are very hard to recover, hard recovery. Okay, and these are basically easy to recover, right? So as I have mentioned earlier, like the system maintains a log file. Okay, log file. You can access this under your MySQL installation if you are using MySQL. Okay, so you can get log file inside MySQL installation directory, and inside this log file we have logs for all the transactions made by database management system. Okay, so in case of the first 4 failure which we have just studied, this log file will be our savior. Okay, so using this log file we can run a recovery, right? As in next 2 cases, this log file itself is in danger because the hard disk is in danger. Okay, so then in that case recovery is difficult, right? So if you want to know more about the log file, In log file, we write details of each transaction, okay, and we assign transaction ID to each transaction. Fine. So these are the items of transaction record, okay, or the log. So the first one is start transaction TID, okay. So it shows that transaction with this transaction ID has been started, okay. Now write item TID X old value new value means transaction TID, okay, writes an item database item X where the old value is this and new value is this, okay. Let me repeat, transaction TID writes over or writes a data item X where the old value is this and new value is this. Fine. Now this is read item. Of course this transaction TID, that is this transaction, reads a data item or database item X, okay. Now this is all about transaction, so when the transaction is done it has to be committed. So this entity or record says transaction this, that is this transaction has been committed, okay. And if a transaction is aborted, we also maintain the record for this, okay. And it says this record, it says this transaction has been aborted, okay. So if you open your log files, you can see entries like this, okay. That of course can vary with the database management system you are using, but it will be more or less like this, okay. So this is all about transaction failure recovery and the log files, okay. So transaction failures are obvious in database management system, it may happen, okay. So we should have a well recovery procedure, well recovery mechanism, okay. And for that, one of the thing which we use is log files, okay. And this log files are stored in your disk. That's why if a crash or if a problem occurs with the disk, then the recovery becomes hard, okay. So hope you understand this. Thanks for watching.